Thank you so much for coming. We're going to get started. Wait, has Robin turned on the camera? Are we good to go? Yes. Okay, great. My name is Kirsten Weld. I'm a professor in the history department here at Harvard, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this latest event in a long semester series called the DACA seminar that is co-organized by myself, Professor Gonzalez, and Professor Johnson in the history department, and managed and overseen by the fabulous Robin McDowell. And the point of this seminar is to raise awareness and to really provoke a community conversation, not just about DACA, but sort of leveraging the visibility of DACA to open up a broader space for debate and conversation about all issues pertaining to immigration enforcement, changes in immigration policy, and its effect on our community, not just here on campus, but more broadly speaking in Boston, Cambridge, Massachusetts, and nationally. So today we have a fabulous conversation with undocumented students at Harvard who will share their perspectives on managing life in an elite institution such as this one. And the conversation is going to be moderated by Maria Agui Carter, who we are so happy to have here. She's a writer and director. She's the founder of Iguana Films. She's a graduate of Harvard University and is currently an assistant professor of visual and media arts at Emerson College. And over a dozen of her documentaries have broadcast nationally and internationally. They've premiered at film festivals all over the world. Some of her recent projects include the PBS documentary Rebel, about a Latina woman soldier and spy in the American Civil War, and her play 14 Freight Trains, about the first U.S. soldier to die in Iraq, Jose Gutierrez, who was an undocumented Guatemalan immigrant who was granted citizenship posthumously after his death. Ms. Agui Carter is now developing the Mariposa Project, coming-of-age story about immigrant girls' rights, in which she draws on her own experience growing up undocumented in America. So I'll pass things over to Maria. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Kristen. I'm very pleased that we're having this critical conversation in this particular political moment. And what I'd love to do is begin by having each of you briefly introduce your names and where you're from and what are you doing at Harvard. If we could start with you here on my right.
Sure. Hello, everybody. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you all for being here with us. My name is Nu Lativangskorn. I am currently a graduate student completing the Master's in Public Health across the river at the Harvard Chan School of Public Health. Apparently, it's a secret to folks on this side of the river that we exist over there. I'm from California. I'm also pursuing a medical degree at University of California at San Francisco, and so I'm happy to be here for some time over at Harvard.
Can you just briefly mention what is your family background?
Sure. Yeah. Originally, I was born and grew up in Thailand, and I moved to California. And actually have grown up there ever since. And so I'm a Californian through and through, and this is sort of the first time away and in the East Coast.
Hi everyone, thank you for being here. I'm excited to be able to have this conversation with everyone. My name is Alma Valverde, I guess Alma Josefina Valverde Campos, but usually I just use the shorter version. I'm originally from Mexico City. I moved to the U.S. when I was 12 years old. I've been living in California, and I call Sonoma County my home. If you heard about the fires, it was definitely something that influenced last semester for me, but I'm glad to say that we kind of helped raise money to help Sonoma County.
What are you doing at Harvard? Where are you at Harvard?
Oh, I'm at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. I am doing a master's program there. They're only 1 year, so I'm trying to get as much as I can done. I'm a master's in educational policy and management, and I like to think that it's like an emphasis in immigration and undocumented students, but it's just because Roberto and I have figured out ways how to do that.
I'll just briefly say that I'm Ecuadorian of Chinese, Ecuadorian, Irish, native background.
Hello everyone. First of all, thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to be here. My name is Carlos Aguilar. I am from Irapuato, Mexico. I was born there and raised there till I was 14. I moved to Texas when I was 14, and for some odd reason that I still don't understand, I consider myself a Texan now. I'm a PhD student at the Ed School, working also with Dr. Gonzalez, and I conduct research with undocumented communities, documented youth, and just trying to, bring out about like our issues and awareness to what's going on with us. Anything else that I might have missed?
That's good.
Hi everyone, my name is Jin. I'm a senior at the college. I study molecular and cellular biology and ethnicity migration rights. So I always say biology and migration because like nobody wants to hear the whole thing. Since you guys are here, what am I doing with my life? So I have like a reverse Benjamin Buttons thing where like so Harvard College students get to college and they don't know what they're doing and then they start figuring things out. I came in thinking that I thought I knew what I was doing, and then as I'm progressing through my career, I'm getting more and more confused. So I'm like doing the thing in the opposite direction. I'm from Flushing, so my parents and I are from South Korea. We moved to Flushing, which is a well-known immigrant receiving community. It's an ethnic enclave for a lot of East Asian immigrants. And we've been living there ever since. So if you ever want genuine dumplings, that's the place to go.
Hi everyone, my name is Rosa. I'm a sophomore here at the college. I'm studying government and I'm still debating between the secondary of history or ethnicity, migration, and rights. I was born and raised in Mexico and I immigrated here when I was 14. It's a really complicated story. And so yeah, I immigrated to Orange County in California and I am still struggling with my identity. I'm like, depending on who I'm talking to, I'm like very Mexican or like very Californian. It's very much a process.
Great. And you're an undergrad.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I want to break out a little bit of our usual, our only identity is undocumented migrants, etc. I want to ask you a different way. If you had a superpower, what would you do with it to change the world? And what would it be?
This is actually a tough one for me. I think, personally, I've always been a fan of X-Men. And I think without knowing it growing up, it has a lot of themes about sort of, the other and society and so many parallels with immigration and society with being mutants. But I had, just for a fun factor, wanted to be sort of the Professor X, Jean Grey, mind reading, telekinetic, moving things with my mind. I think now that I think about the work that I often do and that needs to be done, I think in some ways the ability to not necessarily just read someone's mind, but just understand where they're coming from and what hesitations they're holding and what fears and concerns, I think would be quite interesting to be able to have in terms of talking about immigration, but otherwise just like culture in general, understanding people. So I think it's kind of fitting.
Mind reader. Yeah.
I think mine was along kind of New's idea. I would love to be able to speak every language in the world, like everyone that I hear. And I know Starfire from Teen Titans has that, but it's because, like, imagine how easier it would be to have conversations if you not only knew like the language, but like understood like the different words and the different meanings that they have in a conversation. So it would really allow you to, I think, make a better world. Yeah.
How about you, Carlos?
So I thought about this question because I knew it was going to be asked. And I was like, you know what?
He knew because he reads
Because I already have that superpower. And so I was like, I'm not even going to think about it. I have the answer there, which turns out that I don't. But I do want to build off a news statement in which I would love to have the superpower, because I feel like nowadays it's a superpower to be able to persuade someone to be able to understand our humanity. So if I had a superpower, that would be the one.
So you said you want to be a mind reader. I think I want to be like a mind giver. So like I forget the name of the superhero, but this person can like touch someone and then have access to their memories. So I feel like I want to be able to transmit memories, like from other people and from myself, without having, like that's not possible, right? I mean, arguably like the point of social sciences is to like discover things about how humans organize each other or ourselves. And like one of the things that I feel like we all try to do to resist in one way is to like tell our stories and like make sure that we're humanized. And one of the biggest ways we do that is tell our stories. But a lot of times especially from politicians, there's a level of disconnect between the things the structures that we experience, and then kind of the policy level, like legal structures that are imposed. So like transmitting experience from different people and from myself, I think would be a really useful thing. Right? Or are we not supposed to tie it to like migration art?
No, it's open.
Superman, I'd like to be Superman.
It's your choice.
So I have a selfish one and like a more, in line with everyone else. I want to be able to fly because I love traveling and I can't travel, and so I want to be able to fly. And then on the other side of things, I kind of going on everyone's like theme. See, I'm more of like a thinker, not a doer. So I feel like I want to be able to like transmit my ideas, or like it'd be cool if I could like manipulate minds to like agree with me. That'd be really cool. Obviously, like not gonna happen, but that would be really cool.
I think Fox News has that power already.
Yeah, Fox News can do that. That's what I want to do. I want to be Tucker Carlson.
Well, I traffic in images, and one of the reasons I traffic in images is that I think for the 21st century, making stories in the media is one of the most powerful ways of mind control. And when we watch films, we enter into the stories of those protagonists and enter into their shoes in a way that can create deep empathy. And I'm seeing a resonance in everyone's answers here. When I had thought about that question for myself, I had thought about the power to switch people into one another's shoes, put our president, who shall not be named, into the shoes of a migrant laborer in America who is putting food on our table in affordable ways and trying to feed their children and live a life of honor, right? I want to ask you another question about the ways that you are currently navigating your situation in this world where there is so much, there are so many stereotypes imposed on who the undocumented are, and each one of you defies many of those stereotypes, but also the burden of what that is in this moment of great uncertainty, where policy literally does affect each of you personally. Would you like to?
Yeah. So I'm actually one of the few students at Harvard that I've met that doesn't have DACA. And so that puts me in like a really weird situation, both like identity-wise and like legally, mostly because whenever you hear about like undocumented youth that are at schools like this, it's kind of just like put into a place where it's like everyone has DACA, right? And so I think that has caused me like a really big burden coming here. Because when I was home, and I grew up in Santa Ana in Orange County, which is like a big hub of immigration. And so a lot of people around me are undocumented, like just undocumented. Like there is no distinction between like having DACA or like visas or all of these different things. So that's kind of where I grew up, and like the stories of being undocumented is just like, don't tell anyone, you don't have papers, that's just it. Like there is no complication to this, that's it. And so coming here was just like all of these different caveats in immigration that I had never really been exposed to. And I feel like in the beginning it was very like isolating. Like I didn't know how to communicate to people that not having DACA was very different from having it, but I still had a lot of privilege because I was still at this institution. So I think it just caused me a lot of like identity issues. But I have now realized that like navigating it is equally as difficult because people who are in positions of power don't understand that you need different resources. So I'll go to like OCS or like wherever it is that you need to find internships and stuff, and they'll give me like a packet and it'll be like everything has to be DACA. I'm just like, but I don't have it, and they're just like, what? What do you mean? And so it's complicated to have to re-explain to everyone what it means to just like be undocumented. And I know that Harvard has the resources because my mentor, Gloria Montiel, she came here when she was completely undocumented, like just undocumented. There was no DACA, there was nothing. And she navigates the system like completely correctly. So I think I've gone about it in trying to find people who maybe now have DACA and like have transcended different statuses, but have the same experience that I'm having right now, maybe like a few years ago. And that's kind of how I have found myself finding resources and kind of trying to navigate this elite system.
So there's like a pattern I've noticed too, that it's there's the older generation of undocumented students, like myself, who are now in graduate school, and I would consider myself one of the younger dreamer or undocumented students who was with no DACA at all, right? And I see a resonance with what you're saying, because it's about like finding the resources outside of DACA, or it was. And now I'm like a little worried that people who have DACA, and if they lose it, they're not yet accustomed to that lifestyle without DACA. So I think it's good that we could have a conversation about how coming from like different timelines or different generations of undocumented or DACA recipients is going to affect the psyche of each student differently. And I also wanted to say, we started talking about mind manipulation, but I like to think more of it as like the ability to help people do critical thinking instead of like changing their mind without them knowing. And I just wanted to make that kind of like clarification about that.
That we didn't want to manipulate.
Yeah, we don't want to manipulate. I want to have this conversation so that people know like another side of the story, and then that way, like if they still don't support undocumented people, like but they have thought about it and they have challenges or views, that's cool. Like that's fine. But hopefully by doing this kind of talks, then more people will hear about our story and like be able to decide for themselves if like they want to do one thing or another.
Mm-hmm.
So what I have been doing now, starting in the fall semester, is, so obviously I talk to the people that are closest to me, which are my parents. So I talk to my mom like twice a day. So that's one of the ways, like psychologically, that I like deal with this whole thing, especially after September 5th, when the DACA announcement was released. But like, I think more broadly, what I've been doing is I've been reading a lot of Jean Rawls. So nobody knows him, apparently, but he still remains the most like consequential political philosopher of the 20th century. And he had this book in 1971 called Theory of Justice that also no one knows about. But so he has this tool. It's really dense, but all of his stuff, his personal books, his like correspondences, are in Pusey archives. It's like at Harvard, all housed, and anyone can just go and look at them. So I've been reading his stuff and how he's just fundamentally committed to equality, right? Human egalitarianism. And he has this tool called the veil of ignorance, which is a tool that we use when we think about how we're going to organize like ourselves as a political union. And like he says that everything that's morally arbitrary stays behind. So race, class, gender. Obviously, he didn't say, but immigration status, I presume, would be there too. So like, and he uses this tool to make the statement that we can come together in a political union without having to agree about how best to live our lives. And so I've just been reading his thing to like give myself faith that like a democracy based on a constitution can function without all of us having to agree on like how to live the good life or whatever. So that's just been giving me hope in America in some ways. So I don't know.
Can I actually respond to that?
Yeah.
Because I feel like I wouldn't disagree with that, except for the fact that I think that that can only be true, in my opinion, once everyone's at least on the same page. And I think we often are not about immigration in particular, and we haven't been. In an experience I had in 2013 when the last time when comprehensive immigration reform came out as a bill, potential at the national level, and it was in DC, and as a part of this bipartisan national gathering of Asian Pacific Islander organizations, bringing folks together to lobby and to speak to Congress members. And we got randomized to different visits to lobby, and we met with the group that we were randomized to like 30 minutes, an hour before. And then in this particular group I was in, it was myself and 2 other folks who were from a clearly pro-immigration organization, progressive, left, liberal, so we kind of knew what there were talking points, and that sounds great, I had a plan. But then the last person was a sort of older Chinese woman from Arizona, and the more we started talking to each other, she runs kind of with the head of like a Republican women's organization in Arizona, and the congressman we were going to see was from Arizona. She was his constituent. She was like, I helped get him elected, like ran campaigning for him. So this is gonna be interesting. And so, and we were going our demands, and at that point it was we were trying to get at the reality of deportation, detentions that were happening, and what the bill, when what was being proposed, was similar to what is being proposed now. It's like up, ramping up enforcement, both in financially and in force. And she said, "What do you like? I'm good with that, provision, like, to detain more criminals and give more money to detention centers." And then she was like, "Well, they need to." People who have committed sort of crimes need to be detained and go through the due process, and then sort of get it being seen. And then we were kind of like, do you understand what that means? Like, do you understand what it's like to be in a detention center, that people don't have their sort of due process and their normal rights, and she was like, she had no idea. She was like, what do you mean? Like, at this other rally last week, like this Congress person's office was telling us, they people go through the normal process. And I was like, that is not true. and that was when I realized it's just, we're not even talking about the same thing. We're not at all, and once we kind of shared that with her, I think she came around we went to the visit, and we kind of lined up on the same talking points to kind of go against detention centers and whatnot. But that's not even talking about it being Asian and like this whole many other layers. I always hold that as an example in my mind of I think the work we need to do, but also it gives me hope that once people really understand, whether you're talking about the human experience side of it, but even just the pure information about what's going on in the policies, I think we need to get there to begin to even think that we can come to political decisions that is beneficial to everybody.
I think Neil brings up a really good point, that even within our humanity, our shared humanity, we don't share the same experiences. And that's something really important to notice, or to acknowledge, that even though we're here and we're in such an elite institution, whatever that means, we're still going through different things. And back to the question of how do we navigate these spaces? Personally for me, it's been really hard, because not only do I have to be like a DACA student, but also have to be an older sibling who cannot complain because their siblings are looking up to him. Also a Mexican male, whatever that means, that don't have the space or the room to complain about things. So just take really into consideration everything that's going on. And though I think we agree on this, we're not victims, still the system is imposing some sort of pressure or oppression on us, that even if we're students, even if we're at Harvard, there's always a master's status that comes before everything else, So just to be aware of that, and to understand humanity, but also to understand the nuances of the experiences that we all share and not share. So.
And I wanted to make a point to something else that was said earlier. I think we do defy a lot of we have defied a lot of the stereotypes about being undocumented, but I think in a way we are or at least I feel like I'm perpetuating one of them, which is the dreamer narrative. I try to, or usually I clarify more with saying I'm undocumented, because the idea that every child that has the right to be in the U.S. has to be like perfect in every way. I don't really like that pressure being put into like the next generation of undocumented students, right? But I respect if anyone wants to call themselves dreamer, like that's good. If they decide to call themselves something else, that's fine too. But I think by being here at Harvard, we are like this kids that grew up in the U.S. who are, like high achievers. If we got to Harvard, right, like that we're active one way or another, that we try to help our community. So like, yeah, we have the pie a lot, but like in a way, I feel like I'm still perpetuating it, but I'm conscious of it and like try to like open up more to other experience. Yeah.
I want to follow up on that with another question. There is, with the narrative question of the exemplary dreamer, which is the one that most, through national polls right now, most of America is agreeing, yes, we'd like to accept the dreamers. And the concept of criminalization of undocumented status, there's a narrative being made right now, and has been for a number of years, that the very act of coming here makes you a criminal, and a connection to terrible criminals, like really dangerous criminals, M15 gang member criminals, in our most recent, State of the Union that we heard that narrative. There is a pitting of the perfect dreamer against the rest of the 11 million. How do you conceive of that, and how do you avoid becoming pawns in colluding to really get rid of everyone else, right? Because we're all connected.
$1 million question. Yeah, I mean, it's like a really complicated. So yesterday, Jose Antonio Vargas came with Jose Antonio Vargas and Joey Reid came like to give that talk. I think the biggest thing is just talking about it. That like there are 11.5 million undocumented people, and then 33, I forget the number,
40.
But, right, 43 million other immigrants in America in general. So expanding the conversation to be about not just who deserves to be in America, but who is America for? Like, what kind of immigrants do we really want in America? So I actually asked this question to Dick Durbin Monday. I forget when it was. Thursday. So Thursday, Senator Durbin came, and I asked him the question: who do you think deserves to be an immigrant in America? Who belongs here? Who's America for? And obviously, that's a hard question. Like, it's impossible to give an answer, a one-word answer to that question. But I think like it's what we shouldn't be doing is whenever someone tells a story, a lot of people go, "Oh, so you're a dreamer. I know exactly what you are," because that word exactly encompasses your existence. So that I think is really harmful. But in public spaces and in conversations and dialogues, talking about the fact that what it means to be an immigrant itself is the conversation we should be having, not about particular kinds of immigrants who then should be elevated or have special treatment or status. I think that's the work we have to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know.
And I think the public has failed to make the connections between point A and B, A being the community and B being us. Because as children, as youth, we tend to imitate behavior. And if our communities were as they describe them, there wouldn't be no dreamers here. Because we imitate the hard work, we imitate, the perseverance, everything that we're doing, it's our community. So the public tends to focus on a poster child, but they also neglect the glue who keeps us against the wall, no pun intended. But I think we need to start having conversations where like our family members are next to us, Someone who works at a restaurant and we talk to them and they inspire us to be here, they're also with us. So just expanding, making this table bigger so that everyone can have a seat in it. So I think that's how we should move next. And I think everyone knows it, but no one's taking the steps to make sure that that's happening.
I feel like this is a really, really complex issue, and I've grappled with it a lot. I was doing a lot of activism work in high school, and a lot of the times when like the nonprofit would be like, "Oh, we have all these like media requests, right?" They would give me talking points, and what I started to notice was that all of these talking points were like made so that I could tell my story in a way that I was a victim. It was always kind of like, how do we victimize you the most to the point that we can invoke the most empathy? So instead of it being like, I went through all of this and I'm still going here, it was always like, look at me, I went through all of this and it was so, so, so hard, but like I'm still here. And so it was just like this really difficult thing. And I like realized it really early, and so I was like, okay, this is not the part of a movement that I want to be a part of. But it's not just like back in California where this is happening. Like United We Dream is doing it every single day in Washington, D.C. Like, sure, in one part they'll go out there and be like, we want to dream back now, but then the story part is always like, look at us, we came here and our parents brought here and the border. And it's always like, how do we victimize you the most so that most people are like, oh, poor you, we really want you here. And so on that side, that's kind of where I'm like, okay, it's also the people who are like, we're the most damaged, like our community is the most damaged by that kind of narrative, yet we're perpetuating it the most. And then on the other side, it's always like the media who ask you the leading questions, and the politicians who are Republican, but they can't really justify wanting all 11 million, so they just want you. So then they perpetuate your narrative as well. When senators go up on the floor, it's always like this victimizing narrative, like, look at this beautiful picture, but like all they went through. So I think it's both parts. And I also feel like it's really difficult to categorize dreamers, because back home in Santa Ana, it's like when you're a dreamer, they literally just mean anyone who's undocumented and who's young. Like they literally just mean anyone. Like they don't care if you came here when you're 15. They don't care if you came here when you were 8 months old. It's just like anyone who's here, who was here when they were young, it's just there. And like parents will also refer to the children like that, because they don't understand that outside of that hub of immigration, the larger narrative is the most damaging to them. Mm-hmm. So it's just kind of like, oh yeah, like I understand it's everyone who's young. So like you came here when you were 16. So like when you grow up in those kinds of like very immigrant spaces, these kinds of narrative are transformed, are like taken by the community. They're like, they're ours now. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean that they're translated on the larger level. So there's just like so many complexities to this kind of issue. But
I'm gonna add really something really brief. So I like completely agree with everything that you're saying. To actually like do something about this, especially to journalists, when you tell our stories, tell the full story. Don't tell little bits and pieces that are going to be weaponizable to like the audience that you're kind of reporting to. Tell the full story in all the complexities, all the nuances that you see. That you see us tell the story. So I think like that's like the biggest thing, that our lives shouldn't be a matter of like, oh, because this person has experienced these things, then the outcome should be this. Our stories are a part of America. Like we're a part of the American story, and I think like holistically representing that is like a really important thing.
Yeah, I just want to name something that's really at play here, which I didn't realize it for many years, which is just politics and strategy. And I think it helps me to always try to ask, whenever I read something, hear somebody speak about something, see something being done, like what's the audience here, what are they trying to get at, what are they trying to do, and this whole situation that we're in, dreamer narrative, good and bad immigrants, it's kind of, I don't know if it was avoidable or not. It's been hundreds of years in the making in terms of America's history and roots, but also I view it as, there was a use in why the dreamer narrative came about. To be quite honest, there's, in terms of a political strategy speaking, right? In health policy, like our other professors talk about all the time, or synecdoche, in this word that like you sort of find a strategic portrayal of an issue, and so that you are able to extrapolate, so a lot of people, the general American person, can identify with or recognize, right? And that's what the dreamer narrative was. And I feel like there was a use for it, a great use for it, back in 2010, when like we couldn't even get to like undocumented immigrants because people just didn't even know. And so the dreamer narrative was like the way in. I feel like the mistake then, since then, is that we perseverate on that and that we don't go past that. You know, and if we're talking about media, it's then like, you know, maybe before you do a story on it, you should familiarize yourself as a reporter with the history of it and how that has already been reported on, come about. So now move past that and as Jen was saying, kind of the authentic, more whole picture. I would say that that's where it has been going.
I'm gonna ask you to complicate that image of each of yourselves by telling us briefly a few things that people might not imagine or guess about you.
So I just like, I guess two things came up to my head. I became a black belt in judo.
Whoa.
And so that's, I guess, something that like you wouldn't know. But I think that's like the real important part for me. It's like, we're not just a status, right? We're like full human beings that like have a lot of different interests and passions and like want to do different things. And I've been doing judo for about, I think, 9 years. So I was really happy to be able to have a black belt. Yeah, and I guess the other thing too is that I come from, my mom is LGBTQ, so like I think that's also kind of like a stereotype that maybe, counters, I don't know. It's something that people don't think about, like LGBTQ rights had a lot to do with my immigration status, right? Because at the time when my mom was married, it wasn't immigrants who were LGBTQ who got married didn't get citizenship because marriage wasn't considered legal. So I think there's so many interconnectedness between like all the social and political issues that are happening but we don't often talk about it because we get stuck in one single narrative, whether it's the like amazing and I think well-intended narrative of having dreamers, or just like very like criminalized stories, right? So I like to look at the intersections between that.
Love it. Anyone else want to share?
So I'm like, I told you about this guy named John Rawls. He died 2002. He was born in 1921, and I feel like a connection with this man through all of his letters and like personal writings. And I feel like that's just something that I love, you know? Like, I like visited his grave in Mount Arbor. I don't know if people know that. He's buried in Mount Arbor, which where a lot of the Harvard dignitaries are buried. Yeah, I mean, like all his stuff, his writings really allow me to transcend my immigration stuff. Sometimes I just want to get away from it all, and that's where I go. I go to the archives.
I really love dancing. I think that was a thing when I was really young. My mom put me, because I grew up in Guadalajara, my abuelita, she made this huge dress for me because she wanted me to join dance, and I was like, this is not going to work. Because I love to read, and she was like, I'm going to make you this beautiful dress, and if you like it, then you're going to have to go to these classes. So she put me in folklorico, which is like a cultural dance. And so that was kind of like, that's like my thing. And then outside of that, I think it's really hard for me to like extrapolate my status from who I am. I think I'm at that stage in my life where I'm just kind of like I realize that a lot of my interests all tie back to my identity as like an undocumented person here in the U.S. Even from like a very young age, because my mom, she lived here. Like I was in Mexico with my grandparents and she lived here. So like I knew she was undocumented. So even from that age, it was like a process of like, well, you know, she's there. And when I talked to her, like, oh, I'm working like 3 jobs at this factory because like I don't have papers to get another job. So it was even like at a very young age, I was processing what it was like to be undocumented in this country. And I feel like that's where my very deep interest in politics comes from. So like I've worked on like 9 campaigns, just like different like Senate, like Congress, city stuff. So like campaigns are like the one thing that really get me going, and like institutions and stuff. And so I feel like that is a really big part of just who I am as a student, as like a person, and that ties back to my identity as like an undocumented person and my identity and like identifying my family as people who are undocumented. So I think that that's kind of something that's hard for me.
just want to share that a lot of that resonates with me because I feel like it's just very confusing. I just spend half of my days confused. It's like first growing up here, growing up all as a kid, as a 9-year-old to high school, I was never involved in politics. I was kind of one of the later comers, and as a result of being undocumented, realizing what institutional barriers I had to face, like there was no use in pretending. I sort of then kind of became involved and really found the meaning of having a community, the power and the agency that I could reclaim through becoming involved in this issue. But then, it's like a love-hate, a truly love-hate relationship. As you were saying, I feel like sometimes I'm so defined by what I do and everything is connected to immigration status, but as I was mentioning, I just think, I look back and it's like the past 7-8 years since I think gone through this transformational journey, I just think, but that's how I've become empowered by this, and it's just like a very complex relationship I have with immigration status. And the other, I'll just mention that 2 weeks ago, I was interviewed by Pod Save America. I didn't know how many people listened to that. Afterwards, I was like, oh my gosh. Yeah. And here's how that day went for me. It was on a Monday. I had like class and a whole bunch of things, and then it was going to be at 1 p.m. So I went to an internship that I'm doing with Cambridge Health Alliance. I ran back to the ed school. Professor Gonzalez was so kind as to I needed a landline. There's no landlines nowadays, and they wanted me to use landline. And he hooked me up with a landline phone, and I jumped into the conversation, and then we talked about it, and what I didn't realize, so I kind of did the interview. They asked me with Democrats giving in and the government shutdown and all that. What I didn't realize was that I ended the interview, and then I went on Facebook, and it was the first breath I had for the whole day running around, and that was when the government shutdown had just ended. It had just resumed 30 minutes ago before my interview, and I didn't know it. And they brought it up in the interview, and I didn't quite catch it. They said, some of the Democrats were willing to give in with the promise of a later vote, February 8th, 2 days. What did you feel? And I didn't even catch it. I just kind of proceeded as though there was still a shutdown. But then I'm just showing you this because I checked the news and I'm like, oh my god, first I felt like an idiot. During the interview, I probably said something now irrelevant. But more than that, it's then I was feeling again, this conflicting sense of where are we at now, and just oh my god, nothing's gonna happen. And this has been going on very consistently the past year and a half. Just to describe that, it's every day is such a roller coaster, and we try to resist, but I do what I can, and being involved in a lawsuit is definitely one way, but we just get bombarded with conflicting emotions and messages, and things are happening politically that are attempting to in some ways keep defining our lives. Some days I'm no, I'm more than that. Some days I'm I'm a part of that. So it's just very confusing.
I totally agree with everyone. Yesterday, I for the last week or so, I have been trying to do my DACA paperwork renewal because for those of you who are not completely familiar with this, a lawsuit happened in California, which this guy was part of. And because of that, while the court is reviewing it, they allowed DACA recipients who had already DACA to turn in paperwork, right? So yesterday, I literally was running around from the CVS here in Harvard Square to the law school, and then back to the CVS, trying to get all the paperwork and the money order and everything, while I still had my classes to deal with, my homework, and then organizing to happen. So days like that, I'm okay, I'm definitely undocumented. I'm definitely dealing with this. And then other days, I'm just hanging around, not doing things that are related. But I agree with like the going between two worlds and not really being able to explain it to anyone. I think like sometimes I can't even explain it to myself.
Just want
What was
to
the
give you a
question
moment
again?
to things that people might not guess about you.
Oh, yeah. So something that people don't know about me and probably my advisor doesn't know, so I'm glad he's leaving. I don't like reading, which is
You're in the PhD program.
I know, which runs against like this narrative of like the dreamer and also like the dreamer being like so academically achieving. I don't like reading. Most of my classmates or cohort mates, every time I say this, they're really taken aback. Like, what? How are you here? And I think it's just, I guess the point that I want to highlight is the fact that just this principle of hard work that our communities represent is what keeps me going, and doesn't take academic achievement to be a dreamer, but it takes the hard work that our community has always engaged in to be a dreamer and be a part of this society. So yeah, I don't like reading, but I have to for this 5-year or 2.5 DACAs long PhD that I have.
We're going to 1, is that correct?
I don't know if anyone else is going to come take us out of the room.
Okay.
I feel no strong need to end at 1 on the dot unless you all have places you need to be if people want to continue talking.
So, just want to open it up. But we did discuss one short thing that I wanted to ask you, and not everyone has to answer. We feel a deep need for a call to action and a need for allyship, not only from other immigrants, but from all parts of our society. And so, did you want to say anything specifically about that before we open up for questions?
I've done a lot of work. I learned it from E4FC. E4FC is a great organization to like learn and support undocumented students. But when I was in college, I was trained by them, and now I continue to do like educator and mentor workshops. So I think if like you could attend something like that, that would allow you to like understand the undocumented students' story better. E4FC, Educators for Fair Consideration. If you could just like maybe read an article from them or read the mentor or educator guide, it would really help just the entire community if you ever come across an undocumented student and you know like how to talk to them or that there's resources out there for them.
Honestly, checking in as like a professor or like a faculty member with undocumented students is one of the most impactful things you can do. Like just like at a like personal level, right? Like not like as an educator, like yeah. I think the professors that I've had that will like email me and be like, hey, haven't seen you in class, or like didn't see you in class this week, like what's going on, whatever. Or like, how are you doing? Just like, I saw you in class, but like still want to know how you're doing. Or like come to my office hours, like those kinds of things, just like on a personal level, really bring you back to the ground, like if you're having a bad day or something. Like I know I've gotten those emails when I'm like having a horrible day, like just like all around one of the worst days or whatever, and then I get like, an email, it's like, okay, there's someone at this institution who like cares enough to talk to me, which is something that's really hard when you're coming from spaces like we're coming from, which is like, you kind of just like, I don't know, the way that I was raised, it was like, be grateful for what you have, don't ask for more, just like move along, like do your best, that kind of stuff. And so having someone who you view as like in a position of power, just like check in on you, whether that's academically or like whatever it is something that I've always found to be really impactful.
Great. So let's open it up for questions.
Could each of you explain what it's like realizing that you may be just deported to the country of your birth? How do you go through all of this now, knowing months from now you'll be living in another country?
I feel like that's definitely like a loaded question. I think I have two main kind of like ways that I work with that. One is like, obviously I don't want to be deported, like I consider this my home. Before I used to be kind of like in the mindset that it would be the end of the world. you know, that I would get deported. But lately I've come to be more like okay with even the fact that I could be deported. Kind of like dealing with reality, right? Like the reality is that I will be like subject to being deported if anything happens, right? But I've been educated here in the US, like I speak English, so if I get deported, at least I know that there's a lot of other opportunities that I could have around the world, right? I don't think everyone has the privilege of saying like, yeah, I could go back to my home country, because it's definitely not safe for everyone to go, right? But even if like I end up traveling to another country, it's gonna suck because this is my home. Like I identify as like Mexican and American, right? But at least I know that there's something else after the deportation and that I could tackle that too.
Yeah, so for me, yeah, that's like really empowering. I think like I think it's fair to say that all of us here on the table have really strong ties to America. Like its people, its institutions, its customs. So that's why it's home. And for me, I haven't gotten as far in terms of like how I think about deportation. So the way that I'm dealing with it is, if I'm gonna get deported, Johnson Gate is coming with me. Like that front gate that like you're not supposed to go through before you graduate. I'm not gonna take that with, like I'm not gonna go without some struggle or resistance. Like you're gonna know about the fact that we're getting deported. Like that's how I'm kind of. I mean, I realize it's kind of combative, but like I don't understand any way to like deal with that right now, other than, you know what I mean.
And I must say, like, it took, what, like,
Yeah, exactly,
15
right.
years for me to, like, be in this mindset, right? So, and I don't think it's anything that anyone should be end up there. Like, it's not an end point, but I think this is what I've come to be.
I think that deportation is something that I think about almost daily, pretty much daily, actually. Because I don't have DACA, there's like no protection. Like, yes, I have the protection of like I can put my Harvard ID out, but like how much protection is that really? So like every time I want to go home, like because I live in California, so every time I want to get on a flight, there is this like 15 minutes of just utter like anxiety and fear when I'm waiting in that security line, because you don't know if you're like if that like TSA person is gonna be like, well, why do you? Because the way I travel is my Mexican passport. And the hope is that they don't flip through it, because if they flip through it, then they won't find a visa. And so in the questioning line comes along like, why don't you have a visa? Like all these different things. What are you doing in the country? And it's happened to me twice before. So when once I was traveling out of Atlanta, and the TSA agent was like, you know, why don't you have a visa or whatever? So they pulled me into a room, and I was there for 2 hours. And the only reason why I got out was because the person who was running the program that I was traveling to worked in the UN, and he made a call and was like, you know, all these things, this girl, whatever. And then once other time. So every time I travel, so much fear, so much anxiety. My mom calls me 7 times that day. Will like call me in the morning, will like call me in the afternoon, will call me when I'm at the airport, when I'm in the security line, after the security line, and then she's still afraid until I board the flight. And then once I land, like will call me insistently until I tell her that I'm out of like the airport. You don't have to like no entrance anymore. Until I'm there, she stops calling me. So like not only with like my family as well. Did you guys see that news article where like immigration agents stopped a bus in Florida and made everyone prove their citizenship? So I travel to New York a lot for my fellowship. So like every time I travel to New York, that's a super big fear. Like I stopped traveling in planes because I was afraid of that, and now I'm afraid of traveling on a bus. Just like walking out of Cambridge, that's also really scary for me. So like it's just like all of these different, because I don't have protection. So I know that and my friends always are like, oh, we should go to New York and Niagara Falls. Niagara Falls is the border.
Yeah.
I can't go anywhere near that place. So like just like little things like that, or like any kind of running with the police. I drive back home, I am so afraid every time I get behind the wheel. And I have a license in California. We have everything in order, but no matter what, if I hear sirens, I'm like, oh my God, this is how I die. Like this is where I go. This is it. So and also I have 2 entrances to the United States, one when I was really young and one when I was 14. And so because of that, I have a lifetime bar if I was ever to exit the United States. So while for a lot of people being deported means like being able to come back at some point, like after 7 years or after 3 years, depending on what your bar is, depending on how you are deported, all this kind of stuff, there is no re-entry for me. And I would never want to put myself through being undocumented again. Like, I put myself through it now because I'm here. But I would never go to Mexico and then try to like, crossing the border as anything other than like a child is hell. Like, don't let anyone tell you different. Like, it is the worst thing you could ever do to yourself, to your family members. And they do it because it's better here. Like, my mom spent 7 days in the desert. Like, I would never want to do that to myself or to my children, but she did it because really in Mexico there's no other option. And knowing that I could go back and have some options would really kind of, you know, shift the weights. So deportation is something I grapple with a lot, and actually I've never been asked that question. But it's something that I'm sure others do too.
Do you want to go? Oh, you already said it. Well, I do think of deportation all the time. I kind of, you know, come from a culture where we think about death, not that we want to die, but that we are really aware of death. I'm also really aware of deportation. And I'm always, just as we joke about death, I also joke about deportation all the time. I'm aware of it. I'm ready if I was to go, but in the meantime, I'm here. And if they would like to come, you know, I'm out here. So I live my life with precaution. I'm really cautious about what I do sometimes. But other than that, I don't think about it. I just live my day to day, and whatever happens tomorrow is going to happen, if it happens. If not, we're still here and we're still fighting.
One more question?
Thank you all. It's been very illuminating. I'm a public school teacher. It's probably a question you get a lot, but I've never had a good answer. So I'd love to hear you talk about your time in secondary education and high school and middle school. Where things made a difference either positively or negatively that I could take with me and share with other teachers as well.
There's a thing on February 28th that I'll be on. It's like a panel just like this, but for K through 12 ed. You should come. Will you come to that?
I will plug it at the end.
Yes.
Yeah, plug the website.
I guess so. Something I'll say is, so I'm working currently with BP. Are you teaching BPS, Boston Public Schools?
No.
That's okay. So I'm working with BPS to create a training program for guidance counselors for all 34 high schools in the district to make sure that high schools at BPS understand what just this is. Like, what is an undocumented student? What is DACA? Like, what are the resources in Massachusetts and also nationally? I think that is like the single most important. That's one of the most important things. So the guidance counselor for a lot of undocumented students is the first person or like first barrier that they face. The guidance counselor in the DMV, really, or when we first realized that we're undocumented. So the guidance counselor and teaching staff in high schools have a really, really big role in terms of like how undocumented students first bump up against that initial barrier of their status. So I think that awareness is really important. There's a lot of resources about like what kinds of things undocumented students can do in terms of like going to college and other sources of education. So I think we can talk after, but I think just that having that awareness that itself is really important. I don't know if you guys want to.
Do you want to? I have a really interesting public school story. So I actually studied 4th and 5th grade here before going back to Mexico. And I knew I was undocumented this whole time. And so in 5th grade, Obama appointed Senator Mayor to the Supreme Court. And that was the first, I love politics. And this was the first time it was a name that would roll off my tongue. And so that was really impactful for me. And my teacher, she did like this whole thing where she brought in like this huge TV, it was like a monster TV, and she like made us all watch it. And then afterwards told us all about like Obama's life and like Sotomayor's life and just everything. And then afterwards I like sat there and I was like, oh my God, like people who have like names like mine can be in these positions of power. Like, so I sat there during recess and she came to me, she's like, you know, you looked really interested, like what? Like why, all these different things. And so I told her that, and she was like, yeah. She was like, you know, all these things. And so she told me like how they got there, like educationally, like all these different things. And so at the end of it, it was like in my head, because you know I was a 5th grader, it was like, okay, so if I want to be like them, I either have to go to Yale or to Harvard. Like that's it. Like there is no other option here. And so I sat there for like all of recess, and at the end of class, I remember going to her, and my classroom, the theme of the classroom was Harvard, because every classroom had a different college, and it was to instill like college readiness or like dreams of going to college on elementary school's kids. And so our classroom was Harvard, and she had like this Harvard wall. And we were going up there and being like, well, I don't know what Yale looks like, but Harvard looks pretty cool. So I go up to her and I'm like, I want to go to Harvard. And she looked me in the eye with a straight face, like, and said, okay, let's work on it. And then by the end of that year, right before I left to Mexico, she sat me down and she was like, I know that, there's all these complications and stuff, but you can still do it. And so that was the first time I had heard from an educator, that was not, like, obviously I'm now my mom, that I could do whatever I wanted in spite of everything else. And I went through like middle school and in Mexico, but in high school, when I would tell people I wanted to go to Harvard, they would either like that, like they would like scoff at me or like roll their eyes or like do little, like these were educators who would like do little things. I had a subject to tell me that kids like me didn't go to Harvard. It's like my counselor would be like, but you're undocumented, you can't fund that, like so many things. And so just like the people who told me that they did believe in me, that was really impactful. And like not only just like, yeah, okay, but like these are the ways that you get there. So yeah.
Are you in touch with that teacher?
Yeah, I still, she's ready to come to my graduation. Like I love her.
So thank you, Rosa and Jen and Carlos and Alma and New. And let's give them a round of applause. Thank you.